Another day, a round of sniping on Capitol Hill on an issue that could wreak havoc with the global economy. With Congress back in session, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer went to the floor moments ago to challenge Republicans to identify which specific spending cuts they are calling for ahead of the early June deadline to raise the debt limit. According to Schumer, Republicans have been reaping political benefits for calling for spending decreases without saying where they are actually willing to cut. Take a listen to what he had to say.
If Republicans want to show that they can govern effectively, they're off to a pretty poor start. It's not enough to hide behind the old GOP talking point about wasteful spending. When you're in the majority, substance counts. If Republicans are talking about draconian cuts, they have an obligation to show Americans what those cuts are and let the public react.
Joining me now on set is Lisa Desjardins, correspondent for PBS NewsHour, Faiz Shakir, senior advisor to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and Republican strategist and an NBC News political analyst, Rick Tyler. Thanks to all of you for being here. Happy Monday. No shortage of topics to discuss. Lisa, let me start with you. The debt ceiling, we have seen these fights before. Where does this one stand right now?
This looks like it's going to be messy, and I'll give you two reasons for that. One is that Republicans don't really have a plan for what they want. They don't have clear asks, and some of the Republicans who are really getting us to the point of saying they might block the debt ceiling, what they really want are changes in the process, and to a degree they've already gotten that. So that's going to be tricky. The other thing I'm paying attention to is I believe the base support on both sides is supporting moving both parties away from any kind of agreement. Republicans are feeling more and more justified about risking the debt ceiling. So I think it's going to be a long and very potentially dangerous few months.
Yeah, like many fights, it will likely come down to the wire. You bring me to an important point, though, which is where are the cuts? What do Republicans actually want to see? Chuck, over the weekend on Sunday, pressed Nancy Mace to identify some cuts. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Do you have one thing you're ready to put on the table as a spending cut that you think both parties can accept?
Well, I think, obviously no cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. That's a non-starter for either side. But otherwise, it's up to, I would lean on the agency heads.
Rick, how problematic is the argument that we want cuts? But Nancy Mace is saying, I'm going to lean on the agency heads to identify the cuts. Is that sustainable?
Well, I think it's problematic in messaging because she didn't have one. but look, the debt ceiling is not a place to negotiate cuts, and now the Democrats are taking advantage of this by saying exactly that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have limited, smaller government. That's what the Republicans used to believe that. I'm not quite sure they believe that anymore, so it falls a little bit on deaf ears with me. But I think you're exactly right. They want process and control, but this, again, is not the place to fight that. I don't agree with that. I think they are going to, with negotiation, I think they are going to negotiate, particularly because Joe Biden is at his core a legislator, and legislators who've been around a long time, it's in their DNA to negotiate. So they will negotiate and compromise because especially if, in fact, they head down this road and we have economic consequences, it will be Democrats and Republicans who pay for this. Nobody wins in this. Republicans have more to lose, but the Democrats will pay too.
You're right to point that out about President Biden, though, and he said we're going to talk to them. And Faiz, Republicans jumped all over that and said, look, he's going to negotiate. He's going to negotiate. I mean, is it realistic for the White House to say we're not going to negotiate? Can they continue to dig in?
Well, there's other forms of negotiation. I think Rick was getting at it. You can get outside the debt ceiling and talk about processes or commissions. We've seen those before. As someone who's come to this from a progressive point of view, I hated a lot of those commissions. They tend to be roundabout ways of getting at quote-unquote entitlement reforms, cutting people's earned benefits to Social Security and Medicare. It's just another way of trying to do it. That's why I don't like those processes. That said, it's still a different kind of process than trying to hold the debt ceiling hostage as a way to get at it. And I think the president's on strong ground to say there'll be nothing attached to the debt ceiling. It must be done cleanly. It seems like an easy battle to pick and to win, and the Republicans right now, I don't think, have a desire for an alternative course.
Well, it's interesting. Over the weekend, Senator Manchin said that he thinks the White House should negotiate. In fact, he said he's actually open to increasing the payroll tax.
Well,
he's a
good example of.
That's a Bernie Sanders position, though.
Right. If you put that on the table, you're not talking about cuts to Medicare or Social Security. You're actually talking about increasing funding to them to extend the life of them. Now, if we're talking about improving Social Security, there's plenty of great ideas, and I think those could be done in a way outside of a debt ceiling increase that, again, fosters bipartisan support and gets it to some kind of a process.
Rick, you're smirking. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Lisa.
I think for sure, and to be clear, there will be negotiations, and I think there was a real messaging mistake by the White House there because everyone knows you're going to negotiate in some form, and almost everyone agrees we really do have a debt problem. You know, that's a bipartisan sentiment, and President Biden would agree with that. So why didn't they say instead the debt ceiling must be raised? That's it. We will consider talking about our spending and taxing separately. But instead, the no negotiation stance reads strange to a lot of people, I think.
Rick, how would that have come off to Republicans?
Yeah, my smirk was coming off. I do agree there's a lot of ways to reform Social Security. I don't think we'd agree on any of them, but the current, at least the current system is not sustainable in its current form. But having said that, I don't think that debt ceiling, again, that's not the place to negotiate all of this, reforming Social Security. There should be lots of efforts to do all of those things. But it doesn't look good I think on the Republicans' part that they're willing to put the economy at risk to not raise the debt ceiling.
You know, one of the things that I heard over the weekend just in talking to folks is what leverage does McCarthy have? Because how can he sit down and guarantee a deal, Lisa, when we saw how fractured his caucus is just to elect him to the speakership? I mean, how can he say to the White House, you've got a deal? And I'm going to deliver the votes.
That's right. In Congress, you get leverage from two things, from your votes and from the perception of your strength as a leader. Nancy Pelosi did not have the strength of votes, but she had a great deal of strength and perception and a great deal of consistency in how she approached things. McCarthy is already starting out by everyone saying he can't count votes. He's someone who will wobble. That really undermines his position from go. And I think he's going to have to decide at some point, does he support something that all of these holdouts will not, that will vote against later down the road?
I want to talk about committee assignments, but just very quickly, Rick, what role do you think McConnell can play in this?
Oh, he'll play a key role because he doesn't want the government to default, and he's been around a long time, and he knows the president very, very well, and he will be the negotiation. By the way, it's not just the Republicans because most of the Republicans would pass a debt ceiling, and there's clearly enough Democrats and Republicans to pass a debt ceiling like today, immediately. So and Kevin McCarthy is Speaker of the House, not Speaker of the Republicans.
Rick is urging him, and I agree, to get the partnership with the Democrats. So you put up a bill, and that means standing up to the right flank, which Boehner and Paul Ryan, were ridden out of town by their right flanks, or at least made the jobs really unsatisfying for each of them. And at some point, I think Kevin McCarthy would be well advised to say, hey, listen, you can't let these guys run your show. You're going to have to put up something early on to say, if you aren't with my program, then I'm going to go find the votes.
Yeah, and very quickly, Lisa, before we move on, because I want to get to the Senate race in Arizona, you have this fight over committee assignments with Leader McCarthy essentially saying that he wants to block Adam Schiff from serving on the Intelligence Committee, as well as Eric Swalwell.
That's a great
Talk
example.
A
It's not clear that he has the votes to do that, even to vote Adam Schiff. And there may be different amounts of votes for Adam Schiff from Republicans, blocking him versus blocking Eric Swalwell, two very different concerns. Meanwhile, we're also waiting for Republicans to choose all of their committees. The Key Rules Committee, which was part of the whole Speaker sort of debacle. Still not clear who of those holdouts, what Freedom Caucus members will be on that. The process is, quote, fluid, and we all know what that means. They can't quite figure it out.
So all of this happening against the backdrop of 2024, Ruben Gallego, representative, announcing he's throwing his hat into the ring in Arizona after Senator Sinema switched her party to independent. So this could be a three-way race, Faiz. What do Democrats do?
Not great for Democrats. I think, Gallego would win, I think, in a one-to-one matchup with a Republican. All Senator Sinema would be doing at this point is spoiling a chance of a Democrat. I assume she would take more from a Democrat than a Republican if she were a third-party candidate in a general election. So I hope, as she sees the polling over the next few months that have her at 10% or less, that she thinks about a different way forward for herself.
Rick, it could be a good climate for a moderate Republican to get in. Do you think that happens, or do you think
they're smart?
Who is he late to get into this?
He's absolutely right that the Democrat in a three-way race is going to hand it to the Republicans, and the Democrats are already defending 23 races, and so Arizona is a must-win for them to maintain control of the Senate. And so this is, I mean, anything can happen. But I can't resist. McCarthy should hold Swalwell and
Adam Schiff?
Adam Schiff.
Adam Schiff to the Santos standard, and if he can hold them to that standard, then I think that he should probably let them keep their committees.
That's a whole other panel discussion, Rick, very, very quickly. Yeah. Senator Sinema hasn't announced that she's running for re-election as an independent.
That's right. I think she really, and this is my reporting, that she's been back and forth over the years on that question. She's a fighter. So almost I think Gallego might encourage her to keep going, but I'm not sure she really feels like her future is in the U.S. Senate necessarily.
Yeah. All right, well, we continue to watch this. We'll come back to discuss George Santos because there's plenty to discuss there. Lisa, Faiz, and Rick, thank you for a great conversation.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.